She stood there, holding the tray while they laughed. At that moment, it didn't seem important. Just another dinner, just another insult. But that silence, that quiet look in her eyes, it wasn't weakness. It was a warning, because what they didn't know was that the woman they were humiliating was the one person in that room who could end everything. But wait, here's the shocking part. She had already made her decision, and before the night was over, everything they believed about power was about to collapse. Nia Mensa was the kind of woman people overlooked, not because she lacked presence, but because she never tried to be seen. She spoke softly, walked calmly, observed everything, and in a world where people fought to be noticed, that made her invisible. But she didn't mind, because Nia had learned something early in life. The loudest people were rarely the most powerful. It was always the quiet ones, the ones watching, the ones waiting. But she didn't tell anyone that. To most people, she was just ordinary, simple clothes, no designer labels, no flashy jewelry, nothing that would make anyone stop and look twice. And that was exactly how she wanted it, because this wasn't just her life. It was her test. Every week, she visited places like this, high-end environments filled with people who believed they owned the world, luxury hotels, private events, exclusive dinners, not as a guest, but as someone no one would take seriously. And every time she watched how they spoke to people, how they treated those they thought were below them, how quickly respect disappeared when status did, because what they didn't know was that every moment was being measured, evaluated, remembered. But there was something about this night that felt different. The invitation had come directly from Isabella Rossi, a name that carried weight, influence, power, or at least the appearance of it. The dinner was private, selective, only a few names on the list. Marco Rossi would be there too, and Claudia De Luca, people who moved like they controlled rooms, people who believed they couldn't be questioned, and that made them interesting. Nia arrived early, not through the main entrance, but through the side, quiet, unnoticed. She wore something simple, clean, nothing expensive. Her hair was neatly done, but not styled to impress, because tonight she wasn't there to shine. She was there to see, but she didn't know yet how far things would go. Inside the penthouse, everything screamed luxury. Golden lights reflected off polished marble floors. The city stretched endlessly outside the glass walls. Soft music played in the background. Everything perfect, everything controlled. Or at least it seemed that way. The staff moved quickly, carefully, trying not to be seen, trying not to make mistakes. And Nia blended right in. No one questioned her presence. No one asked her name. And that told her everything she needed to know. Because respect, in rooms like this, was never about who you were. It was about what people thought you were. And tonight, they had already decided who she was. But she didn't react, didn't correct them, didn't speak. Because sometimes silence reveals more than words ever could. And Nia was very patient. But she didn't know that this night wouldn't just test them. It would expose them completely. And once it started, there would be no going back. But everything was about to change. The guests began to arrive slowly, one by one, dressed in wealth, wearing confidence like it was inherited. Laughter filled the room, soft at first, then louder, controlled but sharp. Nia moved quietly between them, tray in hand, eyes observant, invisible, but she didn't know this was where it would start. Isabella Rossi entered last, and the energy shifted instantly. Heads turned, voices softened. Power had arrived. She walked in like she owned everything. The room, the people, the moment. Marco followed, speaking loudly, laughing like nothing could touch him. Claudia came behind him, eyes scanning, already judging. And then Claudia saw her. Nia, standing near the table, still, calm, present, but to them, just another face. Claudia tilted her head slightly, then smiled. But it wasn't kindness. It was recognition of someone she believed didn't matter. "Excuse me," she said, snapping her fingers lightly. Not loud, but enough. Nia turned, walked over. "What's your name?" Claudia asked. Simple question, but the tone carried something else. Something sharp, something testing. "Nia," she replied quietly. Claudia repeated it slowly, as if tasting something unfamiliar. Then she laughed, soft but cutting. "All right, Nia, try not to drop anything tonight." A few people nearby chuckled, not loudly, but enough, and that was how it started. But she didn't react, didn't defend herself, didn't explain, because she didn't need to, but she didn't know this was only the beginning. Minutes passed, then more. The comments became lighter, but more frequent. "Careful with that. Watch where you're going. You people always rush." Little things, small words, but they added up, and no one stopped it. Not Isabella, not Marco. If anything, they encouraged it. Marco glanced at her once, then smirked. "Where do they even find staff like this?" he said casually. Not to her, about her, and that changed something. But she stayed silent, still calm, still composed, because she was watching. But wait, it gets worse. Dinner was served, everyone seated, long table, perfect arrangement, power sitting across power, and Nia moving between them, pouring drinks, serving plates, listening, because what they said when they felt superior was always the truth. "Stand properly," Isabella said suddenly. The room went quiet for a second. Not fully, but enough. Nia paused, then adjusted slightly. Still calm, still silent. And that silence began to bother them, because they expected something. Reaction, embarrassment, anything, but she gave them nothing. And that made it worse. Claudia leaned forward, eyes fixed on her. "Are you always this quiet?" she asked. No response, just a nod. And that was her mistake, because now they were curious, and curiosity, in the wrong hands, turns into cruelty. Marco laughed. "This one, she thinks she's better than us." More laughter, sharper this time, and the room shifted, because now it wasn't just jokes. It was attention, focused, directed, and Nia stood in the middle of it, calm, still, silent, but she didn't know they were about to cross a line, and once they did, there would be no fixing it, because some moments don't just pass. They define everything after, and that was the moment everything started falling apart. It happened suddenly, but not unexpectedly, because tension like that always looks for a breaking point. Claudia picked up her glass, took a slow sip, then looked directly at Nia. "Come here," she said, not loud, but commanding. Nia stepped closer. The room watched, not everyone, but enough, because something was about to happen. And people like this love moments like that. "Stand here," Claudia said, pointing beside her chair. Nia did, calm, controlled, still silent. And that silence started to feel different. Not weak, not unsure, just unreadable. But they didn't notice. Or maybe they didn't want to. Claudia smiled again. But this time, it was sharper. "Let's make this interesting," she said. A pause. Small, but heavy. Then, "Tell me, what do you think people like us do all day?" A few people laugh already, waiting, expecting something. A wrong answer. An awkward moment. But Nia didn't answer. And that changed everything. Because silence, in that moment, felt like defiance. Marco leaned back, watching closely now. "Did you hear her?" he said, still smiling, but his tone shifted slightly. "She asked you a question." Nia looked at him, then back at Claudia, and still said nothing. And then something strange happened. Isabella noticed it first. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. Nia's eyes, they didn't look nervous. They didn't look embarrassed. They didn't look small. They looked calm, too calm. And that didn't make sense, because someone in her position should feel pressure, should feel exposed, should react. But she didn't. And that created something else. Confusion. But they ignored it because pride doesn't like questions. Claudia's smile faded slightly. "Look at me when I speak to you," she said. Nia did, without hesitation, without fear. And that was the moment, the shift, small, but real, because now it didn't feel like they were in control. Not completely. And that made them uncomfortable. But they didn't understand why. Because they were still laughing, still mocking, still leading the moment. Or so they thought. But she didn't know. Someone else had noticed it too. One of the staff, standing near the wall, watching quietly, watching her, not like the others, not with judgment, but with recognition, like he had seen something before, something familiar. But he said nothing, because this wasn't his place. Not yet. Back at the table, Claudia leaned in closer, voice lower now, more personal. "You should be grateful you're even in this room." Silence. Heavy. Intentional. And then Nia nodded. Once. Slow. Controlled. And stepped back. No anger. No reaction. Just acceptance. But it wasn't real, because what they didn't see was what she had already decided. And then something else. Subtle, but important. A phone buzzed. Not loud. Just once. In Nia's pocket. She didn't check it. Didn't move. Didn't react. But that moment meant something. Because somewhere, something had already begun. And they had no idea. The room continued. Laughter returned. Voices rose again. Everything seemed normal. But it wasn't. Because something had shifted. Quietly. Deeply. Irreversibly. And no one could explain it. Not yet. But that wasn't even the worst part. The laughter came back. Louder this time. More confident. Because they thought they had won the moment. Because to them, silence meant submission. And that was their mistake. Nia continued moving, serving, clearing, observing, like nothing had happened. But she didn't know they weren't done, not even close. Marco leaned forward, tapping his glass lightly. "Wait," he said. The room quieted again. Not fully, but enough. Because when someone like him spoke, people listened. "Come back here," he said, looking at Nia. She turned, walked back, slow, calm, controlled. And that calmness, it started to irritate them, because it didn't match the role they had given her. Claudia smiled again, but now there was pressure behind it. "Let's not rush this," she said softly. Then she looked around the table. "Everyone works hard, right?" she asked. Nods. Small agreements. People earn their place. More nods. Then she looked back at Nia. "So, tell me, what did you do to earn yours?" A pause. Sharp. Intentional. But she didn't answer. And that silence felt louder than anything. But wait. Here's where everything changed. Isabella finally spoke. And when she did, the room shifted. "Maybe she doesn't understand the question," she said calmly. Not loud, but cold, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need volume. It carried authority. "Or maybe," Isabella continued, "she's just pretending." A few quiet laughs. But there was tension now, because something wasn't right, and they could feel it, even if they didn't understand it. Marco smirked. "Let's make it simple," he said. Then he gestured to the empty space beside the table. "Stand there," he added. Nia did, without hesitation, without resistance. And that was what pushed them further, because now they believed they were fully in control. Claudia picked up a napkin, dropped it deliberately, right in front of Nia, then leaned back, waiting, watching. The room watched too, some amused, some uncomfortable, but no one stopped it, because power, in rooms like this, is rarely challenged. Nia looked down at the napkin, then slowly bent, picked it up, placed it back on the table. No emotion, no reaction, and that should have ended it. But it didn't, because something about her was starting to frustrate them. That calm, that silence, it didn't feel right anymore. It felt like something else, something they couldn't name. Marco shook his head, laughing again. "You see," he said, "that's exactly what I mean." Then he looked at the others. They don't think. They just follow. more laughter, but weaker now, because not everyone agreed, not fully, and that was a crack. Small, but real, but they didn't notice, because they were too focused on being right. And Nia, she was still watching, still silent, still waiting, because something had already shifted, and they had no control over it anymore. But they didn't know that yet, because what was coming next was bigger than all of them, and once it started, nothing would be the same. What happened next, no one was prepared for. The door opened, softly, almost unnoticed, but the sound cut through the room. One of the senior staff stepped in, not rushed, not nervous, just precise. And that alone felt different, because people like him didn't interrupt moments like this, unless it mattered. "Excuse me," he said, respectful, controlled, but firm. The room turned, annoyed at first, because they hated interruptions, especially during moments they felt powerful. Isabella frowned slightly. "We're in the middle of something," she said, cold, dismissive, but the man didn't move, didn't step back, didn't apologize, and that was unusual. "I understand," he replied, "but this cannot wait." A pause, small, but heavy, because now something was off. Marco leaned forward. "What is it?" he asked, impatient. The man didn't look at him. He looked at Nia, and that was the moment everything changed, because now everyone was looking at her too, confused, curious, uncomfortable, and she finally moved. Slowly, she stepped forward. No tray, no hesitation, just presence. And for the first time that night, she wasn't blending in. She was standing out. The man spoke again, but this time his tone shifted. "Ma'am," he said, clear, respectful, intentional. "We've been trying to reach you." Silence, total, complete, because that one word, "ma'am," didn't belong in this moment. Not for her, not in their minds. But he continued. "The board is waiting," he added, "and the decision can't be delayed any longer." No one spoke. No one moved, because nothing made sense anymore. Claudia blinked. Once, twice, trying to process it. Marco leaned back slowly, his confidence slipping. And Isabella, she said nothing, because something inside her already understood, but she didn't want to accept it. And then Nia spoke, for the first time. Her voice was calm, soft, but it carried weight. "I know," she said, simple, controlled, like she had been here before, like this wasn't new, because it wasn't. She turned slightly, looking at the table, at them, not with anger, not with pride, just clarity. And that was worse, because anger can be challenged, but calm certainty, that breaks people. And then the final shift. "The evaluation is complete," she said. And that sentence hit harder than anything before it, because now it all connected. Every question, every silence, every moment. It wasn't random. It was intentional. And they had failed. Completely. Marco exhaled slowly. "Evaluation?" he repeated. But his voice wasn't strong anymore. And Nia looked at him, directly, calm. "You weren't hosting this dinner," she said. "You were part of it." Silence. Deep, heavy, unavoidable. Because now the truth was clear. She wasn't staff. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't below them. She was above them. And everything they had done, everything they had said, was now exposed. And in that moment, everything changed forever. No one spoke. Not immediately. Because silence like that doesn't come from confusion. It comes from realization. Claudia looked down first. Not by choice, but because she couldn't hold the eye contact anymore. That confidence gone, replaced by something else. Something heavier. Regret. But she didn't say anything. Because what could she say? Marco shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, trying to recover something. Anything. But there was nothing left to hold on to. Because power, real power, doesn't need to prove itself. And for the first time that night, he understood that. Isabella sat still, very still, her face controlled, almost expressionless. But her eyes, they told a different story, because she had seen it. Earlier, that calm, that silence, she had felt it, but she ignored it. And now, it was too late. But she didn't know this wasn't about revenge. It never was. Nia stood there, not moving, not speaking, just present. And somehow, that presence filled the entire room, because everything had shifted completely. The city lights outside flickered softly through the glass walls, golden reflections dancing across the table. The same room, the same people. But nothing felt the same, because now they knew, and knowledge changes everything. The staff member stepped back quietly, leaving the moment to settle, because this part wasn't his role, this was hers. And Nia understood that. She looked around the table, slowly, not judging, not angry, just seeing them clearly for who they were. And for the first time, they felt seen, not as powerful, not as untouchable, but as people who had made a mistake, a big one. But she didn't call them out, didn't embarrass them, didn't return what they gave her, because she didn't need to. That was the difference. True power doesn't react, it decides. And she had already decided. We'll be in touch, she said calmly. Simple, professional, final, no extra words, no explanation. And somehow that was worse, because uncertainty stays longer than punishment. She turned, walked toward the exit. Same calm steps, same quiet presence. But now, every eye followed her, not with dismissal, not with arrogance, but with awareness, because they understood now. She had seen everything, every word, every action, every choice, and none of it could be undone. The door opened, then closed behind her, softly, but the sound echoed, because that was the end of something, and the beginning of something else. Inside the room, no one moved, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to say, only thoughts, heavy ones. Claudia finally exhaled, slow, uneven. What just happened? She whispered. But no one answered, because they all knew. Marco rubbed his hands together, trying to shake the tension. But it didn't leave. It stayed. Because some moments don't pass. They stay with you. Isabella leaned back slightly, still composed, but quieter now, more careful, because she understood something important. This wasn't about one dinner. This was about who they were, and who they chose to be when they thought no one was watching. And that was the real test. Outside, Nia stepped into the night air, the city stretching endlessly before her, calm, unbothered, like nothing had happened. But everything had. She paused for a second, just one, then continued walking, because for her, this was never personal. It was always about truth. And tonight, the truth had spoken, without noise, without force, just the silence. And sometimes, that's the loudest warning of all. Sometimes, it's not what people say that defines them. It's how they treat others when they think it doesn't matter. Because in the end, every moment is seen, every action is remembered, and every silence means something. What would you have done